They said the ridge was empty. No houses, no lights, no easy explanations.
But at 3:17 a.m., someone ran their fingers across a pale patch of lichen and remembered a life that wasn't theirs. Find somewhere dark and quiet. Put your headphones on. Listen closely now.
Tonight's story is called The Lichen Ledger. Let's begin.
Mara grew up in a town that still measures the year by tourist seasons and logging schedules. Bittergreen Ridge looms above the valley like a bruise, beautiful from the road, indifferent when you step into its undergrowth. She volunteers for the park because she likes the work, because it gives her reasons to move, and because for 6 years she has been tracing the shape of one absence, her brother, Jonah.
Jonah went out on a clear morning and didn't come back. There were search parties, a police log with neat timestamps, an empty campsite, and then a slow blur of rumor. People in town learned to avoid the subject. Mara didn't. She learned the trails. She learned how the light sits in a cedar hollow at noon. She learned the names of mosses and how to coax a volunteer crew into patience.
We log everything. Hikers in, hikers out. Missing person reports are files on a desk until they're not. But the ridge, it's been quiet for a long time. When people started saying the lichen did things, I thought it was someone making stories to sell t-shirts.
The first strange event arrived like a misplaced memory. A young hiker, Elise, came back from a day loop pale and certain. She could hum a lullaby she'd never heard, describe the scent of cardamom and wood smoke from a kitchen she had not visited, and name a woman with a chipped tooth whose face wasn't in any of Elise's photographs.
I remember the look on Elise's face. She thought she was losing her mind. She kept saying, "It was under my glove. Something was on the rock, and I just brushed it."
Ranger Ellis checked the trail cameras and the permit logs. No one else reported anything unusual that day. The only common detail was a patch of pale, quilt-like lichen on a granite outcrop, thin, almost paper, patterned with lines and blotches that volunteers called a ledger, because the growth seemed to rearrange itself as it spread.
We started collecting photos. Every volunteer who passed the outcrop took one. At first, it looked like weather and light. Then people began pointing out letters. No one agreed what the letters said, but they noted dates, initials, patterns. Some swore they saw faces. I filed those notes under local color.
But story doesn't live in neat files. It lives in bodies. Volunteers woke with recipes they had never cooked. A retired teacher hummed a phrase of a song she hadn't known. A hunter smelled his mother's perfume at a bench that had never been near her. The ledger grew like an index. Names, fragments, sometimes the smell of a kitchen or the sound of a lullaby pressed into the pattern of growth.
I started going to the ridge more. I brought a notebook. I photographed a corner of the lichen each week. Same angle, same light. At first, it looked like frost. Then, one November morning, I put on my glove and touched the patch without thinking. The pattern shifted under my knuckle, like a rumor moving through a crowd. I felt a name settle into my wrist. Jonah. Not his face, but the sound of his laugh when he was 8.
She didn't tell anyone at first. Who would she tell? A name is not proof. A laugh is not a body. But Mara began to see a pattern in the ledger's growth. When someone new touched it, the lichen rearranged, and within days, small personal echoes bloomed in town. A recipe, a stray song, a decorative ceramic from a house not on any property map.
We logged new reports. We tried to find natural explanations, spores, cross-contamination, shared exposure to plants. Nothing fit cleanly. The lab couldn't replicate memory. We could only document that people reported the same details,
and those details sometimes matched names or dates carved in old trail registers. The ledger created a moral problem that looks simple on paper and impossible in practice. If the earth keeps records, if the lichen archives lives, who gets to read them? The park sold t-shirts and kept quiet. A private group of hikers photographed the ledger obsessively. An old woman in town whispered that the ridge had been remembering people long before any of them had names.
One night, I decided, if the ridge remembers Jonah, I will listen. I set up a stakeout at dusk with one volunteer, an infrared camera, and a thermos of coffee. The air smelled like rain and old pine. We sat in the dark, and the ledger sat pale on the outcrop like a waiting thing.
The first hours were ordinary. An owl, the soft creak of branches, a distant engine on the highway. Then, at near midnight, the pattern on the rock shifted in the glow of the headlamp. It wasn't abrupt. It was as if tiny threads of growth reknit themselves, one line sliding into another, a blotch becoming a punctuation mark. Mara moved forward, and the ledger seemed to unfurl a path of pale that led down the ridge like a sentence pointing to something buried beneath moss.
I followed it. My headlamp caught something under the tuff. Wood, maybe a box, wrapped in roots. We tugged with gloved hands. It wasn't what I'd hoped for. It wasn't what I'd wanted. It was a clue, a small, water-swollen Polaroid of Jonah and another person, someone I didn't recognize, and a scrap of fabric with a stamp from a town across the state. The photo wasn't evidence of what happened, but it was a direction.
They brought the photo to the station. The police widened the search. A reporter came through town asking about the ledger, and the word spread. Some locals were grateful. Finally, a lead. Others afraid, convinced someone or something would be exposed. The ledger had forced an answer. To read nature was to rearrange the town's quiet.
Once the photo hit the desk, jurisdiction changed, paperwork ballooned. The state police processed the item. Volunteers were interviewed. We tried to maintain normalcy in the park. Signs, hours, permits, while the public appetite for answers grew. It's messy when folklore and evidence meet. People want clear causality. The ridge gave us a fragment, and we had to decide whether to treat it like a clue or like a curiosity. The ledger's record-keeping had human consequences. Mara found herself on late-night calls with out-of-town investigators, fielding questions about ethics and consent. Did the person in the Polaroid want to be found? Did Jonah want his name read off a rock? The town divided between those who said the ledger was a gift and those who said it was an intrusion, an archive that violated privacy by making memory public without permission.
Months passed. The investigation did not produce a neatly tied ending. The Polaroid matched a missing person file in another county, which opened new leads, but also new complications. The ridge stayed the ridge. The ledger kept growing to nothing anyone could place.
Then, in late spring, an old window on Main Street fogged overnight, and when the shop owner wiped it clear, he found etched in the condensation like script a single name he hadn't heard in years. Jonah. No handwriting, no fingerprints, no explanation beyond the faint, pale pattern on a bench outside that morning that matched the ledger's geometry.
Sometimes, when I pass that window, I remember the laugh. It isn't the same as finding a body or closing a case. It's a memory that sits in your mouth like an unspun thread. The ledger gave me a direction and a question. What does it mean to read a life that isn't yours to read?
If you hike Bittergreen Ridge now, you'll see volunteers marking paths, cameras mounted on trees, and a small plaque asking visitors to respect the forest. People still photograph the lichen. Some leave offerings. Others avoid the outcrop altogether. The ledger continues its quiet work, neither malicious nor kind, keeping an archive only it can understand.
If this episode stayed with you, share it with someone who listens in the dark. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your subscription keeps stories like this in the world and keeps us asking the difficult questions about memory and consent when the natural world begins to speak.
If you're still here, it means the story followed you all the way to the end. Take a breath. Look around your room. Make sure everything is exactly where you left it.
I'm Samnang. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who listens in the dark like you do.
Until next time, check the corners and sleep carefully. Good night.